Welcome to Hymn of the Week. It's a pleasure to be with you again this week, on the week that we call Holy Week or Passion Week. It's a Holy Week because of what Jesus did for us. It's Passion Week because of the suffering that Jesus went through on our behalf. I suspect that many, if not all of you who are listening today, have gone through some challenging times in your life. Hard times are a part of life. They come with the territory, if you will. If we had time, we could sit down over a cup of coffee and share some stories about how difficulties have been part of our story and how, hopefully, through those difficulties, we've grown. We've found something that has helped us, something that has maybe even turned a corner for us in our lives, in our perspective or our attitude towards things that happen. When we experience hardship and we discover that there is some goodness that comes of it, we're pointing to and remembering the cross of Christ. Our hardships and our learnings are reminding us that Jesus went through everything for us. He suffered and died. How could something so terrible, so awful, so horrific turn out to be the very thing we needed? That's the message of the cross, that this terrible thing that happened to Jesus, his sacrifice on our behalf, became the very thing that we needed in our hearts, our forgiveness, our hope, our joy and delight of a future that is an eternity with him, all because he was willing to suffer. And so on our text this week, we really have no other choice than to go to Isaiah 53. One of the servant songs that talk about Jesus, and this one perhaps most pointedly about his suffering and agony on our behalf. So in this Holy Week, as we anticipate Good Friday, we're going to read Isaiah 53 together. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. As a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors.
Our hymn of the week, O Sacred Head Now Wounded, is attributed to Bernard of Clairvaux, who lived from 1091 to 1153 AD. On our journey to the cross, last week's hymn brought us to the place beneath the cross of Jesus. It's from beneath the cross that we visualize and contemplate the suffering of Jesus on the cross. The deeply moving hymn, O Sacred Head Now Wounded, illustrates the words of 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. The story of our hymn of the week is a long story, spanning a period of about 1,000 years. The lyrics of the hymn can be traced back to the 12th century AD monastery in France, led by the monk Bernard of Clairvaux. Here he became one of the most influential church leaders of his time. One of his literary contributions was a lengthy poem written in Latin, Rhythmica Oratio, describing the suffering of Jesus on the cross. It consisted of 7 parts, each part describing an aspect of his suffering, beginning with his feet and ending with his face. The hymn, O Sacred Head Now Wounded, was based upon the last section of the Latin hymn, which highlights the face of Jesus. Some 500 years later, a German pastor and hymn writer, Paul Gerhardt, translated the entire poem from Latin into German. Based on the last section describing the face of Jesus, he wrote the German version of our hymn of the week, O Haupt voll Blut und Wunden, O head, bloodied and wounded. His original hymn had 10 stanzas. The melody for Paul Gerhardt's German hymn was borrowed from a German love song by Hans Leo Hassler. It was entitled, My Heart is Distracted by a Lovely Maiden. The combined lyrics and tune were published in 1664, and the melody remains to this day in whatever language this hymn is sung. In 1729, the great German composer Johann Sebastian Bach harmonized the melody and included the chorale in his masterpiece, St. Matthew's Passion. The chorale is repeated 5 times within this well-known oratorio. The hymn was translated from German into English by the prominent American Presbyterian minister James W. Alexander. He took a keen interest in earlier hymns published in Latin and German. He died in 1859, and his English version, O Sacred Head Now Wounded, was published posthumously in 1864. I have in my possession a personal copy of my grandmother's Russian Mennonite German hymnal, published in 1892. It includes all 10 stanzas of Paul Gerhardt's hymn. Today's hymnals, however, only include 3 stanzas. Stanza 1 describes Jesus' suffering. O Sacred Head Now Wounded, with grief and shame weighed down. Stanza 2 describes the meaning of his sufferings. What thou, O Lord, hast suffered was all for sinners' gain. Mine was the transgression, but thine the deadly pain. Stanza 3 expresses our response to his suffering. What language shall I borrow to thank thee, dearest friend? Concluding with the words, Lord, let me never, never outlive my love to thee. Listen to the music that's played by Calvin and Heather Dyck, and follow the words on your screen to the hymn, O Sacred Head Now Wounded, our hymn of the week.